What's up, guys? Fantasy Joe back here with some more Dynasty fantasy football content for the upcoming 2021 season. Today, we're going to be discussing some Dynasty players that I would like to sell high on and capitalize on. These aren't necessarily players that I'm saying you have to sell or you have to move on from. They're just guys that I'd be shopping, at least seeing if anyone in my league is willing to, snap them up right now while I can move on from them at their current high values. I'll discuss, I'll dive into why I would trade these players and who are some of the targets I would try to get for them, some type of potential trades. So let's dive into it. First guy up, we got Baker Mayfield. And the reason I'm going to sell high on Baker Mayfield is I think he's coming off of one of his best seasons as a pro, definitely his best year as a professional quarterback and his best season as a fantasy quarterback. Finished the year at QB 17. But the Cleveland Browns are a run-first team. They like to run the ball. That's Kevin Stefanski's scheme. They pounded it last year. Last year in Minnesota, they ran the ball a lot too. People thought that might be because of the Gary Kubiak scheme, but in his first year in Cleveland, we got the opportunity to see that he's also very much a very run-first head coach as well. And so the reason I want to move on from Baker is I don't think he offers me any elite upside, and there's no reason to really hang up on to a mediocre quarterback, especially in Dynasty football. If you're in a single quarterback league and you're only starting one quarterback, a guy like Baker Mayfield is basically useless to your Dynasty roster because, except as a depth piece, your third quarterback or something like that. But because he offers he can't. I don't see him finishing better than quarterback 12 if he had a crazy year. I don't even know if he'll ever get there. And so even quarterback 12 too isn't really helping your team out. You're looking for that elite upside. And so it's like I would trade Baker for basically if I could get 1 year of Tom Brady, I would do that. I'd rather have, because I think Tom Brady will play for a few more years. So I think you could snag him, and I think that he gives you more upside than Baker Mayfield does right now, honestly. And yeah, I just think moving on from Baker is probably the best thing to do because he doesn't run the ball a whole lot. And I just can't ever really see him cracking that top 10 or being a top 8 quarterback or anything close to that, really. So I don't know why you really hang on to him at the onesie position, at the quarterback position. It's not like the tight ends that take a few years to break out, I mean, quarterbacks do usually take a little bit, but he's going to his fourth year in the league. I don't expect any major jumps in talent level at this point. So that's why I would move on from Baker. Getting our next player, David Montgomery. David Montgomery finished last year as RB4, which was one of the main reasons that I would try to move on from him. I would try to sell high and capitalize. People see a top 5 running back, they're gonna give you something pretty good for him. And O-line and quarterback are still major weakness for the Bears roster currently. If you look at predicting offensive success, offensive line and quarterback player are the two things you're going to look at, and they are pretty bad at both of them. So there's really no reason to predict a ton of offensive success for them going forward, just because they had a top 5 running back in fantasy, So I would, because of those reasons of how bad the Bears are on offense, that factors in majorly to my decision to try to move on from him. Another reason is Tariq Cohen's return from his ACL injury last year. Tariq Cohen tore his ACL in week 3, and ever since then, David Montgomery went from playing a little bit more than 50% of the snaps before Tariq Cohen's injury to playing over 80% of the snaps once Tariq Cohen went down. And if we look at his reception numbers in 2019, he caught 25 receptions on 30 targets. And then if you look at his reception numbers in 2020 when Cohen was out, he had 54 receptions on 68 targets, almost doubled his targets, more than doubled his receptions. And I think that's in large part due to just Tariq Cohen not being there, being that third down back, him getting all those snaps all of a sudden and being thrust into that role. And I don't really expect that to continue moving forward, to be honest with you. Another thing to consider is this was a weak year for the running back position overall. If you look at Tariq Cohen this year, he scored 237.8 half-point PPR points this year. If you look at the RB4 and half-point PPR from 2019, the year before, Ezekiel Elliott, he scored 284.7 points. So I think you can capitalize on both the weak running back year last year, the quality year that David Montgomery had, and be able to flip him for something more than his talent level or his predictive success moving forward is. I would love to try to move on from David Montgomery and try to trade him into one of these younger second-year running backs. The James Robinson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, J.K. Dobbins. I said Clyde Edwards-Helaire already. A.J. Dillon's, like those type of second-year running backs. Not A.J. Dillon necessarily until we see if the Packers tag Aaron Jones or not. I'd wait for him for a little bit longer, but or like a Joe Mixon that was injured last year. That they have a bad offensive line too, but they at least have a quarterback in place for the future and a top 5 overall pick to help address that offensive line potentially. I think they'll make some major improvements to that O-line this year, and I can't see it being worse than it was last year. And Joe Mixon's a guy, when he was playing, was getting 20 carries a game and was getting on pace for, I think, 56 receptions last year. And he's a guy that can keep that going all the time, not just when Tariq Cohen's down. You know, he doesn't need the perfect situation. He is the situation there, and he's got the contract to prove it that he's going to be the guy for the next several years. So I would try to move on from David Montgomery, sell high on him, and transition into somebody else. All right, next player up, we've got DAndre Swift. The reason I want to move on from DAndre Swift is not that I hate DAndre Swift, the player. I do like him. I think he's a talented pass catcher, a talented runner. His pro comp coming out of Georgia was Dalvin Cook. I heard a lot of people say that because of his smoothness. He's a very smooth running back. It just looks like when he runs, it doesn't even look like he's moving fast. He passes people and he cuts and moves moves efficiently for sure. But the reason I would move on from him is because he's currently ranked as a top 10 fantasy running back. Yeah, he had showed some flashes of fantasy greatness last year, but the Lions are awful. The Lions have gotten much worse than they have last year. Matthew Stafford loved to check down to the running back. He's now gone. The team is going to get a lot worse because Stafford being gone. I just feel like you can capitalize now on the potential of DAndre Swift and move on from him and not have to take any of the risk, basically. I would love to trade DAndre Swift in something else to get into a more established running back. Like I said, I don't know if you're going to be able to take DAndre Swift and move into a Joe Mixon. You might be able to, though, if you're able to throw in another piece or something like that. But, yeah, DAndre Swift is definitely a guy I would try to move on from, just capitalize. There's somebody in your league, too, that's trying to get younger at the running back position that buys into DAndre Swift. I don't think he'd be a hard piece to move. And I just feel like you can eliminate a lot of the risk in your team by moving him and another asset into a more fantasy reliable piece. And like I said, he's ranked currently as a top 10 fantasy running back, so he's very well regarded, so he shouldn't be too difficult to move, and I would definitely try to before the 2021 season begins. Next up, we've got Derrick Henry. So the main reason Derrick Henry is a sell high is just because I don't know if you're ever going to get an opportunity to sell Derrick Henry higher than you can right now. I mean, he had over 2,000 rushing yards last season and has led the league in rushing 2 years in a row. That is, like I said, he's coming off the best years he could have. He is 27 years old, which is kind of older for running backs, but he hasn't had a ton of carries on his body because he had DeMarco Murray a lot of those earlier years in his career. But I would still try to move on from him just because he is starting to get up there in age, and I just don't know if you're ever going to be able to sell any higher on a 27-year-old running back than you can right now. Derrick Henry also, he caught 18 passes in 2019 and 19 passes in 2020. So he's not, the lack of pass catching is definitely a concern, and that's one of the main reasons that he has consistency issues as well. He has those large blow-up games where he absolutely dominates and gets you 40-something points, but he also has a game where he scores less than 8 because he can't get it going on the ground. He didn't catch any passes or contribute in the passing game at all. And, he gives you 3 or 4 dud games a year as well. And so I would try to move on from him, get someone who can get the pass-catching ability as well. And I think you're going to be able to move Derrick Henry for just a ton right now. I think you can move Derrick Henry for a solid wide receiver and a top 3 dynasty pick. You can go out there and snag a Travis Etienne, a Najee Harris, and a good receiver like a Hopkins or something like that. If you tell to a team that needs to win now that it needs a running back, I think you could definitely get something like that. If you're a team that's not ready to win now, I would move on from Derrick Henry for sure. If you got a chance of winning the title, I'd hang on to him. I still think he's a top 5 pick in redraft leagues next year. I just think in Dynasty, if you have to at least send out some trade offers on him now because you'll never have this opportunity again. I mean, there's only been 8 running backs in NFL history to rush for over 2,000 yards. And if you have Derrick Henry on your fantasy team, you should send out some trade offers while you can. Next player up, we have Tyler Lockett, who finished the 2020 season as the wide receiver 9. The reason that Tyler Lockett, though, is a sell high is the team is headed in a new direction. They fired their offensive coordinator, Brian Schottenheimer, this offseason. The reason being they don't really want to let Russ cook anymore. They want to slow the games down. They want to go back to those run-first teams that they had when they had Marshawn Lynch. Yeah, and really start pounding the ball and not throwing it nearly as much. And Tyler Lockett last year is coming off a career high in targets due to this increased passing volume. He had 132 targets last year, 22 targets more than his previous career high. Yeah, I think his targets going back down to that right around 100 range, which isn't a ton of volume. Definitely not enough to support a back end wide receiver 9 or back end wide receiver 1. So I think he'll slide easily into that wide receiver 2 range. They also have DK Metcalf, who's emerged as an absolute beast. He had some drops and stuff last year, but I think he's just going to he is the alpha in that offense. He'll get more targets than Tyler Lockett will. Even though Tyler Lockett's targets will be down the field and he'll still be able to score fantasy points, I just don't see him being anywhere close to that top 10 wide receiver that he was last year. And I try to move on from him while I can. He was also very inconsistent on a week-to-week basis, which is something that you definitely need to take note of. He had that blow-up game where he had, I think, 3 touchdowns, scored 45-something fantasy points in half-point PPR leagues. But when you had those blow-up games like that, he wins you that week, but he had several weeks in a row after that where it's just like he doesn't do anything. He either win you the week or he could lose you the week. And really, you want a little bit more consistency, even at the wide receiver position, which is an inconsistent position in fantasy football in general. But you can find more consistent players than Tyler Lockett at the wide receiver position. And I would sell high on a guy like Tyler Lockett now while you still can. I think Tyler Lockett finishes a wide receiver 9. You could be able to trade him into a lot of different pieces. I think there's definitely someone in your league who is a wide receiver needed team that could flip you something. I think even Courtland Sutton, I think he's a guy I would love to go out and try to snag Courtland Sutton in a second-round dynasty pick for Tyler Lockett. I think you could do something like that. I think Courtland Sutton will probably be better than Tyler Lockett is year 1, or they'll be similar players. And then you could snag a Rondale Moore or something like that in the second round, the wide receiver out of Purdue, or a wide receiver that drops. I don't know if Javonte Williams will make it to the second round, or Chuba Hubbard. But, you can take a chance at one of those guys like that, and you can get a good receiver back and get a younger player, something like that. Or try to trade him for a little bit of an older player that's already a little bit established. You could do both. But, yeah, I would try to move on from Tyler Lockett while you can capitalize on that value. If you guys like this video, please drop a like on it. Subscribe down below if you've enjoyed the content on this channel. Check out the rest of my channel. We've got a bunch of Dynasty videos. Come out with Dynasty videos every week. Come out with a mock draft on Mondays. Next video we'll be making tomorrow. We're making a video on who is going to be the next Christian McCaffrey in fantasy football. We've got 2 guys that I think could be the next Christian McCaffrey, why you should be trading for both of these guys right now. And yeah, so if you want to see some more great fantasy football content, hit that subscribe button, stick around. We'd love to have you. So until next time, peace out.